Okay. Our interview today is with John H. Yancy. John was born in Brownwood, Texas in January of 1925. He served in the United States Army, the Army Air Corps, and the United States Air Force. His highest rank attained is Major, 04. This interview is conducted at Burleson, Texas. My name is Dale Dexheimer. I'm with the Burleson Heritage Foundation. Also in the room is Milton Gibson, our videographer. Neither of us are related to John Yancy. This interview is conducted for the Veterans History Project at the Library of Congress and for Operation Remember, City of Burleson. And with that, John Yancy, you can tell us about your time in the U.S. military, sir.
My mother and father separated when I was 12 years old, and I had a sister that lived with me, and my mother had told me when I was 12 years old that I was the man of the family. She had never worked a day in her life, and I had to help and go to work. And I worked until I was 97 years of age, 87 years old of age. I'm confused. When I was 77 years old, I stopped working. Now I've got it straight. But basically, I worked 54 hours a week, went to Pascal High School, got off work at 10:30 at night, and literally I made a total of $7.50 when school was going on. And in the summertime, I worked 93 hours a week for $10. I couldn't get the same money that they were paying grown men. I was 14 at that time. President Roosevelt had established that a family could live on $12 a week. And the store I was working at it was destroyed by fire, and I was transferred over to the North Side store and ended up going to North Side High School and not doing very well in grades. In fact, I thought I was kind of stupid because I was learning stuff, but I couldn't take tests, and my test grades were awful. And 21 days after I graduated from high school in February of 1943, I was drafted. And like everyone during the war years, well, we thought it was a one-way trip, so my childhood sweetheart, Doris Jean Janowski, and I got married right before I was drafted. And since I had been supporting my mother, well, I took out an allowance for my mother and my sister, my wife, and I drew $7.50 a month pay. Well, the first 12 months I was in the service. Out of the 29 months I was in during World War II. I had started to work for Frisco Railroad as a motor messenger, carrying waybills from downtown to the 8th Avenue job. And when I came back, my job was open at 67 cents an hour. My wife was making 35 cents an hour, and we set up housekeeping with that income. And she worked nights the days for the 13 months I was out of the service, and I would work nights. And after a month, we said, hey, this is not going to work. I was miserable doing inside work, and I decided to get back into the service. When I was drafted, they sent me to I wanted to go to pilot school like everyone else wanted to do, get in a job and do something to the Japanese or the Germans. And everything was full. Everybody jumped in and joined the service in 1941-42 and received all the rank in a hurry. And I was sent to a B-24 school in Keesler, Mississippi. From there, they sent me to the factory school in Detroit, and I was supposed to be trained for being a flight engineer on a B-24. And I went to Salt Lake City and for overseas assignment, and they said, we do not need any more B-24 maintenance people or flight people. Said, you're going to be a mechanic. I said, okay, I'm going to be the best one there is if I have to be a mechanic. I couldn't go to gunnery school, it was full. So they sent me to a fighter outfit, and after being trained on 4-engine B-24s, that was kind of a letdown. And the first chance I got, I volunteered for overseas, and I was sent to England trying to get in a B-24 bomb wing. And I ended up, of all things, right outside of London, signed to a VIP squadron for Supreme Headquarters, Eisenhower and all of his staff, and the commanders of the eastern part of the war effort. We took care of Omar Bradley, Patton, all the VIPs in London. We were 28 miles outside of London, and the Supreme Headquarters was located in London and came and go. And by the time we got over there in around November of Thanksgiving of 1944, well, the war was beginning to look like it was, we had the momentum we needed. And the people that were originally sent to England to work on aircraft in 1942 were being sent home. And here we were the 18 and 19-year-old boys fresh out of our school. And that was the total training we had in one airplane. But the way we were taught is like the way the pilots were. They basically, if they were a pilot in World War II, they thought they could fly anything, and did. And we felt the same thing about mechanics. I went over as a private, and I ended up with 2 stripes. And we had 23 different airplanes assigned to this little squadron that took care of the VIPs. We had the B-24s, B-26s, B-25s, several different types of transport airplanes and what have you. And I got over there in 2 weeks. They made me a crew chief. I had pressed them enough that I had done my job well enough, and I was qualified and I could run up on all 23 airplanes. And a good example is we thought we could do anything. At that age, you do. There was a B-17 delivered to Bovington, England, in October of '44, and they parked on the left side of the air base, and we thought it belonged to the 8th Air Force, and they thought it belonged to the VIP bunch. So it sat out there for 5 months with no one doing anything in it, and finally some nosy sergeant got in the airplane and found it only had 50 hours on it. Transport crew had brought the airplane in, left the paperwork at base operations, and took off. So some of the pilots wanted to fly it, and they got in and they flew it. And one day, line chief had my crew, which was 3 people, and another crew in, and we were making the circle of the base, and they were letting the people off and said, this airplane has to do this, and the airplane has to do that. And then let off my crew, and they stopped the B-17, and he said, Yancy, you take care of pre-flight in this airplane. It says, Captain Shockley, General Shockley's son will be out to fly it. So I didn't know not to do things right. I know that airplane had to be pre-flighted and things had to be done. So by myself, I get out and pull all 4 of the propellers through that, and without fire guards, which is rather stupid, I went ahead and fired up all 4 engines and pre-flighted the airplane, and everything checked out. And I was sitting on the ground next to the main gear when the captain drove up and says, you the flight engineer? I said, well, I guess so. The line chief said, take care of you. And so we got up and I started the engines for him. And in those days, the pilot basically, flight engineer took care of, in the multi-engine airplanes, they took care of the engine starts and the prop changes and fuel changes and what have you. And I went all through that procedure. And he said, how do you transfer the fuel on the B-17? And I said, well, beats the hell out of me. I'm a B-24 mechanic. I'm not a B-17 mechanic. And about this time, a major came by in a Jeep, and this captain stuck his head out the window and waved at him over. And he said, hey, how you transfer fuel on this B-17? He said, right under the center wing, you turn to the left, it goes to the right. I mean, to the left, and turn to the right, and the fuel goes to the right. He said, you ever flown a B-17 before? He said, no. He said, well, I'll tell you what, said, let me get in the co-pilot seat and I'll make a couple of landings with you. So we taxied around and we come close to base operations, and I said, Major, don't you think it's a good idea if you stop a minute and I run in and get us 5 parachutes? And this is kind of the attitude that I saw from my point of view in World War II, that you do what you can. And earlier, we had had quite a few airplanes that landed intact in Germany, and the Germans used those for intruders. And they would get in a stream of bombers coming in the afternoon, and as the bombers had their flaps and gear down and ready and slowing down to land, they'd open up machine guns and fire up quite a few, shoot up quite a few airplanes. And the major's voice was, oh, don't worry about a parachute. Said, we're just going to be local. We don't have intruders around. And we didn't think that local meant way up in the air. So we took off. And since that airplane had been sitting there that long, that we didn't realize that really we hadn't done the correct part of maintenance on it. And a British Mosquito plywood bomber came by and got in formation with us. And immediately he feathered one engine and put the prop into the wind, cut the engine off. So my captain punched the feather button on #1 engine, and bango, we did the same thing. So we flew along together for a while, and the Mosquito turned his engine back on, did a roll, and took off. And the captain told me to turn our engine on, and bango, it wouldn't. We couldn't start it. We couldn't get it out of the prop change. So we landed on 3 engines, and they said, well, we're going to lunch, so go ahead and fix it while we're gone. I said, yeah, we can do that. I'll pull the prop dome, and cleaned out the dirty oil that was in there. Been sitting there for so long. But that was the attitude that we, World War II, we always thought that, hey, if this guy was a pilot, he could do anything. And I thought if an airplane needed work on, I could do anything. Well, at the end of the war, I realized that, hey, you don't know anything about airplanes, but airplanes. You didn't really get much of an education in high school. And as a result, I realized I couldn't take tests, but I just kind of thought I was dumb. But anyway, at the end of the war, that somebody passed a law that, hey, the people that want to stay in the service that are pilots, we have too many of them. So we'll make everybody that has been an officer in World War II a master sergeant. Well, as a result, at the end of World War II, we had a way overabundance of master sergeants in each organization, and the other ranks were pretty well stuck. And after 7 months, I realized that, hey, you're never going to get above staff sergeant. That I had been promoted to buck sergeant and staff sergeant during that period. So I said, why don't you go to go to OCS, become an officer, and then you can go to flight school. And that's exactly what I did. There was 1,600 of us applied for officer school, and they selected 350. I'm not really sure how or why they did, but I ended up #1 out of that 1,600, and I was a cadet colonel for a total of 2 weeks in officer school because I busted the first test I took, and met both elimination boards because of my inability to take a test. Here again, I thought I was a dummy, and I met 2 elimination boards, and both your generals, different generals, says, well, Mr. Yancy, we're not going to eliminate you because you have shown potential. And I graduated the last out of the 350 that started. 194 of us graduated from high school, and I was number 194. 4 years later, there was 6 of us captains, and the rest of them were still lieutenants, and I was one of those fortunate captains. I had made captain as a non-rated crew member in a World War II organization where maintenance officers were usually ex-pilots. And from that time on, it seemed like that anything that came along I was able to do. From that assignment there, the Strategic Air Command had been taken over by General LeMay, and he was an organizer. He had a maintenance management course at Chanute Field, and in December, after I'd been promoted to captain in June, I was assigned as an instructor to instruct the maintenance officers in a course at Chanute Field, and hell, I was younger than all of them. And after that assignment, why I was they were in the process of building up the Strategic Air Command, and I was assigned to as Chief of Maintenance at Bossier Air Force Base at the 376 Bomb Wing. We had a B-24 bomb wing there, and we're scheduled to get B-47s. And when our first tanker, airborne tankers came into Bossier City, because I had been on B-50s, the modified version of the B-50, B-29 aircraft, that I knew the 4360 engine and the basic airframe on the B-29, so they signed me to KC-97s. And our principal job was had 20 KC-97s assigned to every B-47 wing, which had 45 B-45 wings. And we had opened World War II bases in England, and the B-47s could not fly direct that far. So primarily they'd had an exercise to send a B-47 wing to England. They would send a tanker outfit either to Bermuda or Goose Bay, Labrador, or Newfoundland, Labrador, and I ended up in that type of category for 3 years. In fact, I actually deployed 17 times in the 20 years I was in the Air Force. Literally all over the world with the Strategic Air Command trying to do our job. And my particular job at Fairfield, I was in charge of maintenance there. Strategic Air Command had 13 bases in England, 14 bases in England, and 13 of them had lieutenant colonels as being a chief of maintenance, and I was a captain, the chief of maintenance. And as we started the alert system referred to as reflex, we had to have our aircraft ready to launch within 15 minutes. They were sending people over to my base to see how I had organized the base. I had people from 8 different bases working there. We didn't have enough people to maintain the aircraft, and officials thought that I had a pretty good system, so they sent the people in from the other bases to see how we did it at Fairford. I also helped, I went to Spain and helped them set up that. And when my tour of duty was over, and my family and I were stationed at Carter Air Force Base, and I had worked for General Ryan when he was a colonel and wing commander, and later on he was the officer in charge of the Air Force, Chief of Staff of the Air Force. I ran into him in England one day, and he asked me what I was doing, and I said, well, I'm ready to finish my tour, General, and I'd like to get in the B-58 program if possible. And that's where I ended up the last 4 years, the B-58 program. When I arrived here at Carswell, we had 13 B-58s, and every one of them was a different airplane. It was so new that we didn't really know when the war was going on. For example, they estimated that the hydraulic fluid would be too hot if we used a conventional type of hydraulic fluid, and so they developed a liquid called Ornite for the hydraulic systems. Air contained the ornite. That meant if you got a hydraulic leak and you sucked the air in, your system was gone. Later on, they found out that, hey, Mach 2 airplane does not get that hot. Occasionally, they would have a rivet on a wing that would come out just a little bit and discolor. But as far as reaching extreme temperatures, we didn't. Russia was ahead of us with Sputnik. And they were laying it on pretty heavy with their missiles, and so many of our missiles were blowing up on the pad. And this particular airplane, the B-58, was designed to cruise at 50,000 feet at twice the speed of sound. That's approximately 1,500 and some odd miles an hour. But the airplane was constructed of aluminum foil, about the same thickness as your wife has in your kitchen, and the upper surface and the lower surface was a thin piece of 1/10,000th of an inch of aluminum, and very, very thin, to the point that when we walked on the wing, we had to have put a little socks over our shoes. And it was designed with only a 4G capability, which that meant that you couldn't get in and do violent maneuvers without pulling the aircraft apart. And it was so automated, ahead of yourself, as you exceeded, normally you fly a Mach 2 flight, you'd get up to around 28,000 feet or so, and you go through your checklist, and we would attempt to convince the engines over there that they were all Mach 2 engines. And actually what we did, is the way the designers designed the aircraft, we had a pod in the middle of the intake on the engine, and they went out some 18 or 20 inches or so and restricted the amount of air that was induced into the engine and convinced the engine it was a Mach 2 or a past Mach 1 show. As you started out through Mach 2, you could watch the very tips of the insert engines, which had a little small hole in them that registered the intake manifold pressure. And it went out, you could see the sound barrier start forming as if you had a perfect piece of round glass. And it grew out to 3 feet or so when you reached Mach 2. And you could take pictures of it. I had a pretty fast camera. I took pictures. It didn't show up. And as we started slowing down, the sound writing on the tips of the engine would slow down. And I thought that was an interesting thing. We found out first that General Romay didn't like the B-58 because it was too small. It took too many refueling for it to get from where we were to Moscow. So that was one of the airplanes that was, when they were all manufactured alike and all the systems confirmed, that it was a very reliable airplane. Politically, there was so much going on that our Defense Department said, we can't wait to expedite this airplane until we get all systems going. So the B-58 was called the 43rd Bomb Wing was called technically a ready bomb wing. And we were training crews, and they said, okay, we've lost 2 airplanes with fly-by-wire. The first 4-engine airplane, half of fly-by-wire at Carswell, and said, you're going to test that one for us. So the wing at Carswell tested not only Doppler radar and fly-by-wire that they perfected to the point that nowadays the aircraft, you fly by wire and you think it's a perfectly safe thing, but that's not the case. I wanted to stay in the Air Force. I worked for a general. That was one of the one of the Tokyo Raiders, and there was a regulation out that if you had 4 years of enlisted service, that you could not stay in the service over 20 years. He called in and he said, well, you're one of our 6% high percent majors and we're going to extend you. And I said, well, that's good, General. The day I'm supposed to be discharged, I'm eligible for 16 years commissioned service. And he said, oh, we can't promote you, we can just extend you. And I said, well, that's goodbye. We'll leave it at that point. And I came out and got out of the service and realized that I didn't know anything but airplanes, and I couldn't find anybody that had a Mach 2 airplane to work on. And I started out, I had met some people, and they thought I showed what they were looking for, and we started an executive training program with Acme Brick. I was supposed to go up through that way, and I was up just a little ways in a training program, and we had some people that left the company, and they decided I needed to be in sales. And 2.5 years after I was with them, I was charged of Southern Louisiana for Acme Brick. In 1970, I was awarded the Sales Market Executive Award for selling more brick than anybody in the state of Texas in 1970. At that same time, I was fortunate enough to work at night, about 7 till 2 every night, and built my own house. And I later on went to work in the lumber business and ended up owning several corporations and fairly successful. I've got 3 children. All 3 of them are professionals. None of them have ever had any problem with drugs, alcohol, or they don't smoke. My son was an Eagle Scout with 2 raises. One daughter is a doctor, ER doctor with Cooks. She is an Eagle Scout and has a Scout troop, and the other one is a speech pathologist, and she's equivalent of an Eagle Scout with Campfire Girls. My wife was 67 years old, married when she passed away, and she had always wanted to be a nurse, and she graduated from DCU when she was 64. We're very fortunate individual.
John, going back, you were married?
Married for 67 years. I don't know if I was born first or married first.
You were living on $7.50 a month when you went into service. You had allotments to your mom and
I had a
sister?
lot more. They took $22 out for my wife, gave her 50. They took out 12 for me and gave my mother 37. I had $6.70 for insurance, and then I had $1.50 for clothing, and that left, I believe, $7.10 a month.
So what did you do with all that money?
Well,
This
I'll tell you
would have
what
been,
I did.
19
After everybody went to sleep, I got up and went to the latrine, and I'd find a toothpaste that had 2 good squirts. I picked that up. I picked up a piece of soap. You just got to buy.
This would have been 1944?
44 was when I went overseas. 43 is when I was drafted.
Okay.
And then when I went overseas, I got an extra $10 for being overseas. I thought that was heaven on earth.
Did you get to keep that $10?
That was mine.
Oh, that was okay. When you got to England, you were in a VIP squadron, flew George Patton and Bradley. Did you ever meet any of those
yeah.
guys?
Oh, yes, I met a lot of them. You all heard in the movie Beatles Smith, he was Eisenhower's chief of staff. I happened to live in the same little Quonset hut with my line chief, and a day after or so after VE Day, why they woke the line chief up about 10, 11 o'clock at night and said, we need an airplane to go to Oslo, Norway tomorrow. And he said, okay. He turned around to me, he said, Yancy, you go. Okay. And I didn't know it at that time, but it was General Beadle Smith. And his name really was Bedell, middle name, the nickname in the middle. And we took off from Bobington at 7 o'clock in the morning and flew to Bremen, Germany. And he did whatever he has to do for a couple of 3 hours, and we waited on a ramp. We came back and went to Oslo, Norway, and we were the second airplane to land in Norway after the war. And we come out of it just nearly dark, and he said, we're going back home, so we flew back into Bobington. I think we landed around 1 or 2 o'clock at night. And I just recently saw on some of the films that they've released, footage they've released, that Beadle Smith signed the surrender because Eisenhower was tied up doing something else. And when he got off the airplane that night, he was a 2-star general. And when I saw him on TV the next day after that, he was a 3-star general. He ended up being a 4-star general and a very nice person.
Did you ever meet Patton?
No.
Did you see him?
I've seen Patton. I've seen Omar Bradley. I've seen Doolittle. I've personally met Tibbets, dropped the atomic bomb. Normally, ground people are passed over. They're work type.
When you saw Patton, pearl handle 45s?
I don't think he had on his guns then. I'm sure he didn't. He had 3 stars on his helmet, and it was a chrome helmet. I remember that.
Was it chromed?
Yeah.
The helmet was?
Yeah. Yeah.
He wasn't too worried about being shot in that case, I guess.
No. You didn't worry about it getting shot. You just knew that, hey, accident happened. Very dangerous work when you're flying, and you don't realize just how hazardous it is. And of course, you washed your damn coveralls. There was a greasy washed them in 100 octane fuel to get the grease out of them because we didn't have a facility for cleaning.
John, you talked about intruders. If I understand this, if a B-17 went down in Germany and it was salvageable, the Germans would rebuild that airplane?
Yeah, that happened with fighters and B-17. Well, any airplane that was, the guy said, hey, I'd rather land it instead of being burned up or crash landing. Well, they did it. We did the same thing with them. That our pilot flew 103s and 190s and what have you. But they called them intruders. It was a perfect setup. You'd get up and, well, you think, I remember one time, just after Thanksgiving in 1944, that one particular morning it was perfectly clear. The sky was just as blue as could be. And I could look at this direction, I could see nothing but airplanes. And I looked north, east, south, and west. And from horizon to horizon, I saw, later on I found out it was 11,000 airplanes flying over at one time. And unfortunately, they didn't have cameras that could grasp that. We could get a group here. And what there was, we had a small area, we'll say maybe from here to San Antonio, that they had 300 air bases. And when they launched these big air raids, sometimes they would schedule the takeoffs from the B-17s and B-24s first, then the B-25s, and then the 26s and the A-20s. They'd launch the slowest ones first, and when you'd take off, you'd have to remain in a small area because there were air bases all around you. And they would take warrior airplanes that had flown their combat missions, and they didn't want to fly anymore, and they would paint them real strange colors. They may be pink with polka dots on it. That meant when you took off, you followed that airplane until you got all 30 of your airplanes in the air. And the most phenomenal sight you've ever seen when you can see 40 or 50 of those airplanes circling, shooting flares off, and they're gathering. And I can remember briefly that about the last thing I say is we're going to take off and climb out this morning at 75 feet a minute. Now that is all that airplane could do with a heavy load of fuel and a heavy load of ammunition or what have you.
How many? 75?
75 feet per minute.
Yeah.
This B-58 out here, when you put a half fuel load on it with a 4-engine Mach 2 bomber, we could fly that sucker out at 23,000 feet a minute. The F-16 probably around 30,000 feet a minute.
Yeah.
But you said your controls would be just sluggish as hell. They were trying to get as much speed as you could out of those.
I would imagine that was just a little above stall, wasn't it?
Just above, oh yes.
Wow.
Well, it was the same thing when we started refueling the B-47s with KC-97s, that with a 5-degree drop down on our nose or KC-97, we could only get 210 knots. Your boom dropped down 16 feet. That meant the bomber had to come up, and he was getting light, and you were as heavy as hell trying to maintain. And he was screaming for more weight. I mean, more speed. And then he started picking up weight, and we transferred, and we started getting lighter. And then he had a problem of he getting the weight above stalling speed. And when we first started this refueling bit, we had lots of KC-97s released at one time. In fact, I had a sequence of 19 tail numbers in a row in the squadron I was assigned to, because they were turning them out so fast. So they thought, well, the idea here is we'll go up to 20,000 feet and just spread KC-97s across the sky, and we'll come in and fly 15 bombers underneath them and refuel. And it wasn't unusual for a B-17, a B-47 to stall out and spin right down through them. I'm very fortunate in saying that I've signed off hundreds of aircraft saying it's ready to fly, and every aircraft I ever signed off, it came back. It was a pretty good record.
Interesting people that you met or that you remember. Certainly you talked about Beadle Smith and some of those generals. Anybody else in all those years that really stands out, John? Somebody that you remember as outstanding? Maybe.
Well, John Ryan came. We were the 97th bomber when we came up from England with it, with B-50s, was absolutely the bottom one on the totem pole as far as the way they were rated and sacked. And they run General Hutchinson off, and they hired a Colonel John D. Ryan. The next year, we won bombing contestation. He was the most fascinating person I think I'd ever met, and he took a shine to me. He promoted me in a hurry and whatever. But he was in everything. He could remember names. You know, first name basis. I was John, like that. But he displayed the leadership that you look forward to. I guess that's the most fascinating person I ever met is an individual. I didn't know it until I was in my 60s what dyslexia was, and I'm a victim of dyslexia. And I couldn't understand why I couldn't take tests. I was learning stuff, and I was a fast learner. I fell 2 years ago and broke some vertebrae in my back. And while I was in Baylor Hospital, a speech pathologist ran a bunch of tests, and she kept running a bunch of tests on me. And she stopped. She said, "Mr. Yancy, you realize you probably got the fastest brain that I've ever run across?" And I said, "Well, I knew I was always capable of doing something that other people couldn't do." And I was pleased with that, and I'm still capable of doing things that you wonder why. That barn out there has got 84 different sheets of paper that I designed, prefabbed it, and put it together in a week out there.
John, we certainly appreciate you taking the time to do the interview this afternoon. Appreciate all those years you put in the
Well,
service.
I want to say one thing that about the deployment, and it's too long to even think about quoting, but it's about the ground people. Pounder said, "You'll remember your pilots, but you won't remember who your crew chief was." They're the most dedicated and underpaid and overworked people I've ever run across. The aircraft mechanics. Majority of worked on this B-58 over here that had the second job in order to support their family. Now they've corrected that. They have a decent wage, but for years it was just dedication.
Okay. Thank you, sir.